Hey friends, thanks for joining us on the Changed Movement channel. Let's get started.
I don't know why I always get nervous sharing my story. It's not like it's someone else's story that I could be sharing and not get the details right. Like there's nothing that I will probably miss because it's
vulnerable.
my story. Yeah. But so like Ken said, I walked out walked away from a struggle with same-sex attraction in 2015 and have been living a completely different life since then. And Leann and I have been married for 10 years in 2 weeks, which is very exciting. So I brought my struggle with same-sex attraction into our marriage, and I unknowingly, truly, I thought that I was good, but really I had just shoved it down far enough that I I could live a somewhat, I don't know if you want to say normal life, but we got married in 2010, and I really thought that I had been through a process of healing and that the Lord had kind of brought stuff up. He definitely shown me like, hey, this is a part of your story that you're not necessarily like when I would share my testimony, I didn't talk about same-sex attraction. And so I had known the Lord for about 5 years. So 2009, he reminded me like, hey, this is something that was a piece of your past. And it's something that's really important for you to remember. And he just kind of brought my awareness to it. And I was like, oh yeah, totally. That was a thing of the past, but like, sure, I'll tell people about it. Obviously, that's the short version of it. But I started walking into, I was like, we got married, and I was like, everything's great. I'm very attracted to Leann. I love her deeply. And so I didn't really think too much of it. And then,
well, we should say I did know about it when we first dated.
It wasn't hidden.
Yeah, David, but he just talked about it as like a past thing. And so that was a really hard conversation. It was like one of those 3 hours in a car late kind of thing. And you're like, what are you trying to tell me?
I'm pretty sure I only said like 10 words in that conversation.
Right. But he finally got there, but it was like a passing. I used to struggle with this, but I came to now I don't anymore. And I was like, okay, cool. I don't really know what that means.
Yeah. But you were super
of course, like, so yeah.
Like there wasn't any judgment or anything, but yeah. So so that's kind of like the beginning years of our marriage. I mean, the way that we got to like, okay, this is something that we need to be focusing on and seeking healing for. I started to fall back into having attraction to guys after we got married. What we have like worked through and understood to this point is that I really finally just felt safe to be honest with someone. Felt like I was in a really safe place in my relationship with Leann to actually face into the things that were really, really difficult. And so our first anniversary, actually very vulnerably, I started looking at porn again after a couple of years of not. And that was a very difficult conversation because Leann, our best friends some of our good friends got married on our anniversary. So Leann was in the wedding and I was alone on our anniversary, and I was, just feeling really low and fell back into it. And so we had a really tough conversation of like, why was this a thing that you went to? Like, what's going on? And then we just kind of set it aside, and it came up another year later, like, hey, I think that this is still a thing that I need to talk about. And Leann was like, no, you're good. Like you said, you're healed, and you said that this is a thing.
Right.
In the past. Let's just like, it's in the past, right?
I just didn't know how to face it. Like, or it was
neither of us did.
Weird. I mean, I was like 23 or 24, and I had no grid for that.
Yeah.
Well, there's no training on sexuality hardly at all, and they certainly don't train a wife how to deal with that, right?
Right.
That was definitely not part of our premarital counseling.
No.
That way. It's not like a chapter in the premarital counseling book.
I was also like, no, you're definitely not. And just like, let's just move on, and you're fine, and we're going to be fine.
And your heart in that was good. Like, hey, claim what you know the Lord has done. Like if the Lord has healed you.
I probably didn't even do
You did. You were. It was like your identity isn't in that. Like you don't like
Yeah.
you're being lied to that this is still a thing. And I
Okay.
was like, yeah, okay, that's fair. Well, then we moved to Portland in 2013. Right? Yeah.
Oh, I just threw up in my mouth a little bit.
And we had a friend there who was going through Portland Fellowship, which is a ministry in Portland, helping those who struggle with same-sex attraction or sexual identity to walk out of it. So him and I were talking, and he was like, "This is why I'm in Portland." And I was like, "Oh wow, I've never heard someone be honest about a struggle with same-sex attraction before as a present thing." I only knew a couple of people that were like, "Yeah, I like kind of had that in the past." And so I was like, I think that there's probably a reason that I'm here and that I'm connecting with you. And so long story short, I ended up getting some counseling with one of the staff members at Portland Fellowship, and Drew Berryessa actually with the Living Letter Ministries. And
Yep. We love Drew.
yeah, and he was the first person that named for me some of the things that happened in my past. When I was describing what had happened in my past, he was like, "Hey, I think that there's more to this than what you maybe realize." And like, you weren't just experimenting as a 3-year-old, you were actually molested as a 3-year-old. And
Wow.
that continued through your childhood. It wasn't an isolated event. And I was like, oh, hold on. Like, my world is kind of imploding, knowing that the story I've told myself my entire life is that, oh, this is just like something that kids do, because that's what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the reality is that I had been abused, and that I needed to name that in order for me to like actually face into what was going on. So that kind of turned the world upside down a little bit, but in a good way. And it launched me into a season of like really diving into what went on in my heart, what was going on in my childhood, what happened with family and with my upbringing and everything. How do all these things play into my identity right now and my struggle? And how do I walk through this? I don't want to just like exit out of it, because we know that you can't just say, I don't want this anymore, and then it goes away. We have to face into the things that are causing us pain and trauma.
Yeah, that's good, David. Yeah.
So
what were some of the things that you had to process through?
That's a good question. There was a lot of emotional neglect from my parents that I mean, not to fault them, they didn't know what I was going through. But there was also a lot of just emotional and verbal communication that just showed me that I wasn't necessarily valued, I guess, is kind of a broad stroke of saying it.
Yeah.
And I had a really rough relationship with my dad that was very vacant on his part and volatile, because I felt like I just felt like I needed so much from him, and I couldn't get what I needed from him. And then my mom and I had a really like overly connected relationship where I took on a lot of her emotional needs. And so I think those are some of the things that I had to walk through. And a lot of that led into like, what do I think about myself? What do I feel about my appearance? Am I capable as a man? Am I even part of the male gender? Because I feel so othered by the male gender. I don't feel like I belong here. Yeah. How do I find security in who God made me to be as I am? Like, I don't need to be another form of myself in order to be okay. But how am I okay right now with myself? And asking myself really hard questions about like, is it okay that I have had this struggle? Is it okay that this is my past? Is it okay that now my wife is brought into this and I didn't know that? And like, can I walk through this and find health and wholeness in a way that maybe I didn't realize was even necessary, you know?
Yeah.
Or possible.
So I went through I actually went through Living Waters Ministries, their 21-week program, and I found so much grace and healing in a group of people who didn't all struggle with same-sex attraction, but were just seeking healing and seeking Holy Spirit. And the Lord really met me in that season in a way that I had no idea he was going to meet me. And like, he dug into like all of the wounds. I mean, Living Waters is such an incredible ministry for the way that they lead you into like, is this an area where you feel broken? Is this an area where you might have experienced trauma? Is this an area where you need healing?
Yeah.
And asking the Lord to speak into that. And I was so hungry. I think I was just primed for healing, and primed for a change to happen. And so I jumped into that, and the Lord really met me. And towards the end of the course, there was a night where we were praying, and I felt like the Lord he like took me into this vision of my heart, and we were like standing in my heart. It's like this open room, and I felt like we were standing on the floor, and he was like, this floor that's below your feet isn't actually like the seat of your heart. It's not the floor. It's not the base, but this is what you've constructed to cover the things that are actually causing you a lot of pain. And you've buried them in there because it's a lot safer to keep them covered than it is to let them out, because you haven't felt safe yet to let them out.
Yeah.
And he was like, do you want to look below the floorboards, and like, do you want to see what's down there? And I was like, we've done everything else. I guess we don't really have an option to do something. I don't want to back out now.
Yeah.
So he like, in this vision, he peeled back the floorboards, and below the floor were two things. One's like kind of a partial third, but one of the things that was down there was my need for connection, need for love, need for comfort. And I had buried it because I felt like there was no place for my need in relationship or family or, or in life. Like there wasn't a place for it to have room. And then
you just supplied other people's needs.
Yeah.
I think that's important to note. Like, that's what you were so.
Yeah. I set my needs aside so that other people's,
because you were just constantly supplying need to your family, lots of different ways, other people. And so there was no space. You felt there was no space for your needs.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Wow. I think a lot of people have found them. I'm glad you said that. I think that's something really great for a lot of people to hear. A lot of us, I think, did that, and you can only do that for so long, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's vulnerable to to know what your need is, and then to articulate it.
Yeah.
And then, especially when you've been hurt or you don't feel safe or there's pain, you're not going to then take the vulnerable step of saying, I need this, or I really want this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, David totally lived a long time without saying what needed.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah. And then the other thing that was there was my gender. Like, what does it look like to be a man? And I had only really experienced the world talks about toxic masculinity. Like, I had actually experienced that. Like, that's, it's not what the world says it is right now. Like, you experience it in your family, and it's usually behind closed doors, and it's usually in really private settings where you're experiencing like someone else's masculinity, like they're hurting, and so then they're lashing out at you, and that's like, it's really damaging.
Yeah.
And so all I had experienced from my dad, my uncle, both of my grandfathers, like just not healthy men. And so I had just kind of like, I was like, I don't feel like these other men. So clearly there's not a place for my gender to be like in this. And so I'm just going to put it there. I never felt like I was supposed to be a girl, but I always felt like I don't fit in. Like, I don't fit the mold at all.
Yeah.
So the Lord, he pulled that back and showed me those things. And in the vision, it was all rotting. Like, it was all just a mess down there, because those things are like, we're not supposed to hide them and deprive them of oxygen. Like, our needs need to be expressed. Our gender needs to be expressed. And they need to be expressed healthily. Otherwise they're going to cause pain. And so he, in the vision, kind of scooped it out and put everything in his hand and was like, this is the true bottom of your heart. Like, the floorboards are removed. Now I have room to move in and put my life inside of you. I can speak identity fully into you, into your heart. And I mean, this is all through a lot of tears and snot and a lot of stuff, but it was
I can imagine.
Really incredible. And I walked out of that night feeling no less same-sex attracted. I still felt same-sex attracted, but I knew that healing had taken place. And so from there, I walked into a season of what I call my physical therapy season. Like, the healing had happened, the surgery had happened, but if I was going to live out the truth that had been set in the fullness of my heart, what was that going to look like? What did it look like for me to live as a man, fully as David, not ascribing to the way that I had seen masculinity up until that point?
Mm-hmm.
What would it look like for me to learn how to healthfully express my need and to seek comfort in people that are safe? So that was 2015, and man, things went like 0 to 180 from that point, because I had allowed room for the Lord to move in.
Thanks for watching. For more info, head over to our website, listen to our podcast, or find us on social media. And remember, changed is possible.